Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Max Verstappen wins his 50th career Grand Prix, but a real case of what could and should have been today from the Mercedes garage, arguably throwing away with the victory for Lewis Hamilton with incredible pace in that newly updated Mercedes car. But two bad pit stops on the Hamilton side of the garage and a botched strategy call early on throws away the opportunity again from the Mercedes garage. They've got to seriously think about how they keep bottling these opportunities and what they need to change internally to ensure this doesn't happen in the future, with Red Bull very rarely making any errors on the strategy and the pit stop side, even when Verstappen started today at a serious disadvantage. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. The less said about yesterday's sprints, the better. I didn't do a video on it, and for very good reason. I'm sure there'll be topics in the coming days on exactly what we need to do to fix that. But let's dive into today's race, because it was actually at least somewhat entertaining. And first of all, Stroll and Alonso and the two Hasses started the lane from the pits. This is because their car was shambles after the setup they decided on Friday, so they decided to brake park firmly and change their car. They even put the old floor on Fernando Alonso, the one before the new upgrades, just to see if it would work. And actually, it did work pretty well. Now, it's always difficult to say, isn't it? Because Alonso's got more pace than Stroll, so is it Alonso or is it the floor? But still, they decided to change the setup. I'm sure they learned a lot from today's race, despite Alonso not finishing it, unfortunately. This is the start, though. So it was chaos, really. Norris leads into turn one, as is usually the case, starting P2 at Kota. Leclerc didn't have a great start. Russell had a really bad one. The two Alpines went wheel to wheel here, and actually Ocon had contact with Piastri, who's coming from further back, as you guys can see. Russell had a poor start. That put Verstappen P5, and Hamilton almost gets squeezed here between the two Ferraris, manages to stay out of it, but does end up going down to P4. And again, if Hamilton had maintained P3 or even P2, then we could have had a very different race. But not the best start for Hamilton. Gets to P4. But it was very evident quite clearly that Mercedes in Hamilton's hands, because Russell was not quick today really at all. But we know that Hamilton at this circuit, it's one of his best tracks. He's always incredibly quick here. And his record here was ridiculous. He's been on the podium, I think, every year he's been here since maybe like 2013 or something, when he was maybe fourth. His record here is absolutely absurd. And, he was probably going to be the big challenge today for Verstappen. Maybe Norris, and in the first couple of stints, that looked very plausible. But that somewhat quickly fell away. So Norris leads the race at this point. Verstappen is hidden behind this sign here with Piastri in P6. But unfortunately for Piastri, his car quickly broke down after, following the contact with Ocon. Hamilton made moves, got past Sainz, got past Leclerc, got himself up into P2, and was, over time, closing the gap on Norris. It was, the gap was hovering at around about 3 seconds. Hamilton got it down to 2.5, got it down to 2, and all the time Verstappen's making up ground, gets past the two Ferraris, and finds himself in P3, around about 4.5 seconds behind Hamilton at the time. So, it was race on. Verstappen didn't have, compared to the sprint where he had very impressive pace, and maybe that would have been the case without these brake issues, let's be honest. But the thing is, when the opportunities present themselves, as they did today, you've got to capitalize, especially if you're Mercedes, and they failed to deliver. This was that first lap contact between Ocon and Piastri that ended both of their races. Ocon had to retire basically immediately after damage to the side pod. Piastri had a few laps before he had maybe a hydraulic issue or some issue with overheating. Based on the contact, they had to retire the cars. This, though, was when, alright, Verstappen obviously would have had life left in his tyres. It's a Red Bull. The reason why the Red Bull isn't as good in quali as it is in the race, and the reason why it takes it a few laps to heat up its tyres and is kind of vulnerable at the start of Grand Prix, is the same reason why its tyre degradation is absolutely unbelievable. It doesn't work its tyres this hard. The anti-dive suspension definitely has a part to play in this, but it does mean that Verstappen's tyres are definitely not dead. I mean, you're going for the tyres here, they look pretty healthy, to be fair, here on lap 70, but they knew that the undercut was the way to go. Pit now, get the chance to catch up a little bit on the rest of the competition, and Red Bull were very clear that this was going to be a two-stop. They were under no illusions they could one-stop this. They knew it was a two-stop. They put the mediums on with the intention to ensure they get a nice, clean undercut on those nice medium tyres. So, when Red Bull do something, it's almost always the best strategy, and this is what Red Bull executed again. Now, I thought that both Norris and Hamilton were going to react to this. I thought the very next lap, Norris was going to come in, Hamilton was going to come in, and they would both have maintained track position over Verstappen. And honestly, if they did that, we could very much have had a different victor today. However, Hamilton stayed out, I thought, for just one more lap. I thought they were going to say, right, you know, maybe you've got a bit more life left in the tyres, go for a bit of an overcut over Norris maybe, or just, you know, try something. But that wasn't the case. They then came on the radio and said, can we do target +4? And we don't even know what the target was necessarily, so this could have been to lap 25, 26. Turns out, that was not plausible in these tyres. Hamilton was having a hard time. He locked up actually on one occasion as well, and you know, was struggling with the grip, and it was quite clear that they had to bring him in. The problem is for Mercedes, they thought they could one-stop. And I understand it from Mercedes' point of view. They probably thought, if we do what Verstappen's done, we can't beat him in a straight fight. We've got to try the one-stop if we want to win. And I get that, but the problem was they eventually had to revert back to the two-stop. And by the time they'd done that, they'd lost so much time. If they'd just done what they should have done and pitted Hamilton immediately to cover off the undercut attempt from Verstappen, they would have been fine. But Hamilton was driving on these old tyres, losing so much time, probably like 2 seconds a lap or something to Verstappen's fresh mediums. And within about 3 or 4 laps that he did extra, he probably lost about 8 seconds of Verstappen. Like, it was bad from the Mercedes side of the garage. And okay, sure, you get that back in like offset later in the race, but you don't get all of that back if you make the wrong decision. And that's what Mercedes did. They thought maybe they could one-stop here, but as soon as Hamilton locks up, they knew that wasn't the case. And I don't, you know, absolutely blame them for thinking about it, but I just think given the circumstances, it's not like Verstappen had insane pace to the point where there was absolutely no way they could have held him at bay. There's definitely a chance that Norris and Hamilton could have worked together. You know, Verstappen wasn't driving cleanly through that dirty air. Like, he was having a bit of a hard time with the dirty air closing in. You know, took him a while to get past Leclerc, for example. So, you know, and the Ferraris caused him some problems. So I definitely think beating Verstappen on his strategy was possible today. And Mercedes thought it wasn't. Therefore, they pit Hamilton late. And even when they do pit him, it's a bad pit stop. And it's definitely frustrating, right? Because Red Bull are consistently in the low 2.0s. And okay, Verstappen had a bad stop today, was a 3.3. That's a bad stop for Verstappen, is in the 3s. For Hamilton, you know, 3.6 is par for the course, you know, like a 3.0 is what Hamilton's happy with. And this is the thing, Mercedes have had this philosophy for years. Let's keep the pit stops, you know, they're going to be relatively steady, but they're going to be clean. Are they clean? I don't really think so. I don't think it actually works, this idea of slow and steady wins the race. That's not how it is on pit stops. If you can gain 2-stop race, you can gain 2.5 seconds. You know how much time it takes to catch up 2.5 seconds in race time over an actual Grand Prix distance? Like, you've got to be way faster than the other guy to close that type of gap. You can lose that in a couple of pit stops, and Mercedes do lose that in a couple of pit stops. Hamilton's first stop was a 3.6, his second stop was a 3.3, which was, you know, right there. That's the distance between Hamilton and Verstappen at the end of the race. Lost just in the pit stops, not even including the poor decision on when to box him, right? Because he allowed Verstappen to get the undercut. Verstappen then only had one car ahead in Norris, and that wasn't going to be too much of a challenge. However, he did have the brake issues, and we knew this relatively early on in the Grand Prix that he was struggling with the brakes. Not exactly sure what this is. I do find it hilarious that Verstappen's on the radio talking about what will probably go down as the most dominant Formula 1 car in history, talking about how it's, you know, it's a piece of trash, like this car's terrible, and, you know, he talks about it when the gearbox is playing up, and look, I'm sure there was some issues, but when there's issues with Verstappen, like, he definitely lets you know about those issues, and he lets his engineer know as well. So he definitely had to do some management too. It wasn't the cleanest race, and let's be honest, we saw the real pace of that Red Bull yesterday, I guess, in the sprint. So, but as I say, they were vulnerable. There was a chance. So there was one point, there was around about 19 laps to go, and Hamilton was leading, and Verstappen was around about 16 seconds behind. So there was no way that he was going to hold on for the one stop. It wasn't a viable strategy. We saw what happened to Leclerc trying to hold on for it. It didn't work. I think Ricciardo tried to hold on for it for a while. It didn't work. So the only strategy was to go for the two-stop. He then pitted for the mediums and had the better tyre for the last stint of the race, which was good for the Mercedes. But the gap at that time was 7.6 seconds to Verstappen. Then Norris, of course, was up the road. Leclerc was up the road as well. So there was a massive amount of work to be done here, right? Like, the fact that Hamilton was ahead of Verstappen by 4.5 seconds in that first stint, they basically did the same strategy, but Mercedes messed up the timing and they got a bad pit stop. And that delta reversed by like 11 seconds. I know that Hamilton, you know, at that time was on the hards and Verstappen was on the mediums. There's some difference there, but, you know, that swing that's what caused the race to go the way that it did. And if Mercedes made better pit stops, or they made a better strategy call and pitted him lap 18 or 19 rather than lap 22, I think we have a different winner today, to be honest, because, could Verstappen have overtaken Hamilton in a straight fight on the relative paces they had on the final stint? I don't know. It would have been possible. Verstappen probably could have given it a good go, but I think it was far from guaranteed. Like, Verstappen was having a hard time overtaking the Ferraris. He wasn't breezing through. Like, he had to make some lunges to make those moves stick, and, the one on Leclerc was pretty borderline on whether that was, kept just about within track limits, Leclerc off the track, and that was a little bit controversial, but he was on the inside. Like, I think that's probably just about a fair move, but nonetheless, like, Verstappen would have had to work really hard to beat Hamilton in a fair fight if Hamilton was P1, but you can never overtake Verstappen. Like, it's just not possible. The car's too fast in a straight line. Unless you have a massive tyre offset, actually overtaking him is nigh on impossible, and even if Hamilton had caught up Verstappen at the end, it probably just wasn't going to happen. So Hamilton was on the radio like, look guys, such a big gap ahead. You've put me in this spot. And this is what he said. He was like, guys, how have we lost this much time? Like, why am I here and not further up? And obviously Bono's like, oh, your forecast P2 maybe the win. I thought this part was very, optimistic. I thought Bono was just telling Hamilton that he could potentially win just to, motivate him a little bit. I think that realistically P2 was the only possibility. I was somewhat surprised that Norris's pace towards the end of the race fell off as it did. It might just have been Hamilton with insane pace, because Russell was not really quick today. But Hamilton just had, to be honest, even Bono said it after the race, just ridiculous pace compared to what was potentially expected of that car. And Russell didn't have a great time today either. And to be fair, Hamilton just gapped Norris big time at the end of the Grand Prix. I was also somewhat confused why Norris effectively just let Verstappen go. I don't know whether he didn't expect the lunge from Max, but Norris just kept it all the way to the racing line. He let Verstappen go as if he was going to be as if he was going to be one-stopping, right? When he let Verstappen go here, I thought, all right, Norris is going to try and one-stop. He's thinking, all right, Max might get 5-6 seconds ahead, then pit, then he's got to catch up 10-15 seconds to win the Grand Prix. There was a thought that was going to happen at one point, and both Hamilton and Norris were going to try one-stop, and obviously Max was forced to a two-stop because he'd gone medium, and had to run a different tyre compounds. Obviously, that didn't happen, because then again, Norris was right up behind Max, and this is what confused me. I was like, well, if you're going to let him go, why are you now pushing to keep up with him? Why are you now pushing to stay in DRS? Because if you are going to try and one-stop, what you really want to do is back off in Sector 1, let Verstappen get 2-3 seconds up the road so you don't get the dirty air that cooks your tyres. But as soon as he was trying to keep up with Max, I was like, all right, well, he's definitely two-stopping. So, maybe he should have defended harder. Because if he defended harder, holds Max back for a couple of laps, then that might have been, at the end of the Grand Prix, the gap that Hamilton needed to actually get the victory. So Hamilton had to make some moves himself. He got past, the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, who was still on that one-stop. And then he made a nice move on Norris, actually. This was into turn 1 when Norris defended really aggressively. Hamilton then almost dummied him in a way deep into the corner, similar to what he did at Sainz on the final lap of the sprints back in Qatar. And then he got the move done on the exit into the first sector. And at this point, he had 6 seconds to catch up, 5 seconds ahead, obviously managing that problem with the brakes. It didn't look possible, and I think it was pretty clear that it was going to be P2 all the way, but he did give it a good go. And Max was on the radio saying, oh, shut up, GP, while I'm braking, I need to focus right now. Definitely Max was, a bit flustered, definitely the pressure. Okay, maybe it wasn't massive pressure, but, he was feeling the heat for sure. Verstappen in the cockpit, and, you don't really want Hamilton bearing down upon you. The gap gets down to about 2.2. I think the gap was about 1.5 actually, and then I think it was Zhou helped Verstappen out with some DRS when he was overtaking him, and then he kind of got in Hamilton's way. So the race was over anyway. Hamilton wasn't catching him, but the gap probably would have been about 1 second if not for Zhou. It eventually was 2, but great performance of Max again to get from P6 to P1. But I just think the other teams messed up here. I don't think that Norris really had the pace anyway. The Ferraris obviously didn't, but Hamilton definitely did. And this is what Toto Wolff admitted on the radio immediately afterwards. He's like, look, well done, Lewis, but we could have done a few things better. Your driving was great, driving was amazing, car was there to win it, right? No doubt. When Verstappen's P6, and he has a brake issue, these are the races where you've got to capitalize. You're not going to get many better opportunities to beat Max in a race this year, given how consistent he is. And, the problems with that car are relatively rare, and qualifying issues for Max are relatively rare. This is the chance. And, as he says, they've bottled it. I personally think they've messed up so many times this season. Pit stops have generally been bad. Strategy has generally been bad. Even, I think, in Qatar, I still believe that putting Hamilton on softs in P3 with Russell on mediums P2 2 on the start of the Grand Prix was a mistake because you're inciting some sort of issues in turn 1, which eventually happened. So Mercedes even admitting here that they messed up, at least in part. And, I think Toto Wolff's really got to become culpable for this. Because I remember there was that moment where he overtook Norris and he had that little wry smile and grin on the camera. And, I'm sure he was thinking in his head, okay, damn, Lewis is cooking today. And yet we had the chance to win this. But yet it's not gone our way because of poor, strategy calls and poor pit stops operationally. And this is what Toto Wolff presides over. Beating Red Bull is not as simple now as having the fastest car because you don't, and it's tough to beat them that way, and Verstappen is very hard to beat himself. You need to at least be close to them on strategy and pit stops if you want a chance. But this is the issue with Red Bull. They've got the best driver, they've got the best car, and they've got the best strategy and the best pit stops. It's like, how do you really intend to beat that? You've got to be at least close to them on 3 of the 4 of those things. And okay, they can get close on driver, they can't get close on car, they can't get close on strategy, they can't get close on pit stops. And this is why McLaren are still, despite losing to Hamilton and Mercedes today, showing up Mercedes, because they are at least closer to Red Bull on those metrics than Mercedes are, and that cost them today, no doubt about it. So, should be a wake-up call. Now, it's not like they can't do good pit stops, like Russell's pit stops were acceptable, 2.8, 2.5. But think if these were the other way around. I mean, that's almost 2 seconds between Hamilton and Russell. If they get that the other way around, then, the story could be very different, right? Another 1-2 for Verstappen and Lewis here, right? It's actually the 3rd year in a row when Max and Lewis have finished 1-2 in that order at this circuit. It was the same story in 2021. It was the same story last year in 2022. This was, 2021 was a close fight as well. To be honest, all years have been semi-close fights. But, incredible scenes. Do you feel bad for Leclerc? I know that everybody knew this was coming, but still, even poor Leclerc getting told to let Sainz go. Like, it's just painful, right? You've started P1, you've been forced onto this one stop, it wasn't working. You and Verstappen have swapped places. It's just tough scenes. So, yeah, just as we close out the video, I wanted to look at the drivers here. Norris somehow got driver of the day. I think people were like, it was early race bias as to why that happened. Sainz P4, Perez got to P5, so a respectable result from Perez. It's not terrible, given where he started. Limits the damage to Hamilton somewhat, but still, 8 points gained still by Hamilton. So what is he going to be, 19 points now in the drivers? Like, that's definitely doable over 4 races to go. Russell P7 in the end. He was actually pretty close to Leclerc at the line. Then Gasly, good points for Alpine. Stroll, fair play to Stroll. Stroll, honestly, might well have been like near driver of the day contention, because starting from the pits to finish P9, that was impressive. Didn't even get lapped by Verstappen here. Alonso unfortunately had to retire towards the end with an issue with he thought it was a hydraulic issue, then it was something on the floor, so thankfully not damage to the new floor. That was on Stroll's car, so I'm sure lots of learnings there for the Aston Martin, and Tsunoda completing the points. So that's going to do it for today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.